Hello, viewers. In this episode, I speak to longevity expert Phil Micans. Educated in food and nutrient technology, Phil also holds qualifications in pharmacy and biochemistry. Having been heavily involved in the anti aging community for more than 25 years, Phil also advises and moderates for numerous organisations, including the British Longevity Society, the Monte Carlo Anti Aging Society, the Stromboli Conference on Aging and Cancer, and the London Anti Aging Conference. Today, he is the co editor of the Lifespan Medicine Journal, the editor in chief of the Aging Matters magazine, and a founder of the IAS Group. Links in the description below. I believe it's really important that we take care of our health, especially given the times we're living in. Please check out my website at nutrientnirvana.co.uk, where you can find pure, non GMO herbs and supplements of the highest quality. Thanks for watching, and please look after yourselves. Hello, and welcome to the Nutrient Nirvana channel. My name's Paul, your host, and today I'm joined by a very special guest, Phil Micans. Hello, Phil, how are you?
Hello, Paul. Everybody watching. Doing very well. Thanks very much.
You're looking very well, mate. Glad to hear it. Okay, so the primary reason why I've got you on today, Phil, is to talk about longevity. That is your specialised subject after all. I thought we could just start with the basics, really, and then move on into more in-depth kind of things. So if we can start with diet, according to your own research, what should we be eating and when should we be eating? And I say when because that's quite a hot topic at the moment. So if you could give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, and the things I've learned and people I've spoken to over many years, I think there's one thing we know for sure. There's no one diet that suits everybody.
Mhm.
That's the first thing to be aware of. But in general, I do believe in the paleontological diet in terms of what were our ancestors doing 10,000 years ago, because
Yeah.
our genes haven't moved up that far on since that period. And
Mhm.
so anything we can do to kind of assimilate, mirror what they were doing is not a bad thing. And in some very easy terms, I would suggest that eat natural
Yeah.
always, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just avoid, yeah. Somebody, I think I'm just I'm going to forget his name for a moment. Somebody very famous once said, in terms of food, if it's got a label on it, it's probably poison. I don't think that's too far off the truth.
Mm,
So eat
mm,
natural, eat seasonally. Don't eat the same thing all the time. We
mhm.
don't honestly think our body expects us to eat exactly the same time, exactly the same foods. That
Yeah.
wouldn't have been true of us as tribes moving across, the heathland looking for things. We would have come across berries, and then maybe the following day we might have caught a pig, and then maybe a few days later we'd have found something else, some nuts. Our diet needs to change, and I think there's a number of reasons for that. There are messages in food which we might come round to a little bit later on in our conversation. So eat seasonally, eat natural, and the other thing is do not cook foods at high temperatures. Okay, we all know that frying is not healthy,
Mhm.
but microwaves. There's only one place a microwave should be in, and that's a trash can, a bin. Um,
Absolutely.
you know, avoid them at all. I know it's hard because you find yourself on a plane and you want to eat something and they probably microwaved it. Or, I found myself at a service station not that long ago, and I walked in and I saw the menu, and I said to the waitress, I said, okay, I've looked at the menu. I said, but which of these foods is not microwave? To which her reply was the salad. So I had the salad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, that's unfortunately with me you can get down a lot of rabbit holes, but there's a rabbit hole with that. So cook, if you're going to cook your food, look to what the Raw Food Society do, I would suggest, because unbeknownst in their name, not all their food is raw. They do cook, but they cook at a low temperature, so you can just, when you like to eat a soup and it's just that right temperature, it's not scalding, it goes down well. What That's the right temperature, and you say, well, why? It doesn't break the enzymes in the
Mm,
in the food, and it doesn't reduce the nutritional quality of the food by that much. So
mhm.
cook, eat natural, change with the seasons, mix it up a little bit, um, and do not zap any food.
Yeah.
Cook it slowly at
Yeah.
lower temperatures.
What do you think about a plant-based diet, which is becoming more and more popular? Before you answer, can I
Yeah.
just say that I've been eating, I would say, probably 70 to 80% animal foods over the
Okay.
last 2 or 3 months, and
Yeah.
I have to say I'm feeling very healthy.
Yep.
I'm feeling
Yep.
very good.
Yep.
So. What are your thoughts on? I mean, what sort of how much meat should we be eating? Years ago,
Mm,
I was briefly a vegetarian, and people used to say to me that if you eat red meat, it putrefies in the gut, it rots in the gut, it stays with you for a long time, etc. But then I discovered the work of Dr. Natasha Campbell McBride and GAPS,
mm,
and she says, we're not ruminants. We don't have 3 large stomachs where we can
mm,
digest all these plants and stuff. So where is the truth in all that?
mm.
Should we be eating more animal foods or less? What do you honestly think?
I think again, going back 10,000 years, how would have our ancestors have lived? If they'd
Hmm.
have caught themselves a wild boar in the forest, that would have been one hell of a good day, right? And they would have
Hmm.
gorged on the meat, and they would have eaten every part of that animal, which is
Hmm.
another point we perhaps ought to come round to. And nothing was wasted. Although they probably more often would have eaten food, plants, and nuts and things like that. Going back to my mother's time when she grew up in the 1920s, meat was a rarity because it was expensive. So the chicken was the Sunday meal. And,
Right.
they would have made the most of it. They would have used the bones, they would have made, soup and all the rest of it. But it
Yeah.
would have perhaps been predominantly plant based. But I think it comes back to my initial point: eat natural. I think a
Hmm.
lot of we get processed animals, right?
Yeah.
If we're drinking milk from dairy cows, they could, in America at least, they could be treated with 146 different antibiotics, and they're forced to produce copious quantities of milk. Which
Hmm.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the numbers, but if you look at a cow from the 1940s who was producing maybe several pints of milk a week to ones now that produce them by quarts,
Hmm.
and you see that when the cows are moving through the field trying to move all that milk with them, that it's just not natural. And they're
Hmm.
given various hormones like growth hormone to speed up the growth. So you're consuming that too.
Yeah.
Whether it's in the milk or in the meat, you're consuming that too. So I'm
Hmm.
guessing you, Paul, are probably a good guy, and you're going out and you're buying good, natural meats that come from the farm that
Yeah.
and that the cow is grass fed and all that good stuff. And I
Hmm.
think you're on a good path when that happens. Also, just want to add that in this day and age, we have people saying, "Oh, I'm on a low fat diet," and I always say, "Why?"
Hmm.
And they go, "Oh, I don't want to get fat." Well, I say, well, fat doesn't make you fat. And I actually don't call them fats anymore. I call them oils, just to try and
Right.
get away from that confusion. And guess
Okay.
what? There are good fats and there are bad fats, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
But the fat in an animal, if the animal is healthy, that fat is the best source of energy you'll ever have, right?
Hmm.
If the animal is diseased, then the fat will be the first store of its toxins.
Right.
Okay. So let's just remember that if you're eating GM foods with pesticides built in, or if you're eating animals that have been, how should we say, corrupted to grow fast and put weight on and all the rest of it with various things, you're also consuming those elements. And some people believe that the extraordinary rise that we've seen in recent decades with allergies to food
Yeah.
are, which weren't present in our grandfathers, perhaps even in our parents' days, or
Hmm.
very, very small numbers of them, are not an allergy to wheat, to bacon or whatever it is. It's an allergy to the pesticides that are being used on those food groups.
Yeah. I've heard that.
Mm,
Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very interesting. So, supposing somebody, and I mean, we live in very difficult economical times at the moment. So, supposing somebody's option was only to be able to afford to buy factory farmed animals,
mm,
and that was the only way they could get meat into their diet.
mm,
Should they be avoiding that and just sticking to plants? What would you say?
mm. Well,
Difficult.
firstly, um, as somebody once said, if staying healthy is expensive, try disease. Um, because when the SH1T hits the fan, that's when you remortgage the home and do everything to try and get out of it, don't you?
Yeah.
And that's not the case when we're just thinking, well, we haven't got enough pennies to rub together.
Mm.
First of all, I would say, if at all possible, still, I know an organic chicken costs more to buy than an inorganic one, but how about eating a bit less of it and making absolute use of it all?
Yeah.
Like a
Quality over quantity. Yeah.
Yeah, get those bones, use the broth, make a soup. It's a bit more involved, isn't it? It's
Mm.
not opening the packet, microwaving it for 2 minutes and throwing everything in the bin, right?
Mm.
It's a little bit more involvement here.
Mm.
But
Yeah.
in the long run, your health is going to benefit, and the way you feel, you're not going to be as depressed. First thing I wanted to say, anybody I've ever met goes on a low food diet, says two things to me pretty early on. One, I've got no energy anymore.
Yeah.
Two,
Mhm.
I feel quite depressed.
Mm.
Well, it's no wonder you're
Yeah.
avoiding all those healthy fats. What the hell do you want a low fat yogurt for?
Mm.
Right? If you Let's just
Yeah.
take yogurt as an example. Eat a bit less if you want to, but get the full fat. You will benefit from it. Your
Mm.
brain will like you for it. Your energy levels will like you for it. You'll
Mm.
just feel better.
Yeah.
And how do you get low fat ham? Right? Let's ask ourselves a question. Suddenly, now you've got to ask yourselves, what are they doing to
Mm.
remove the fat from ham? Well,
Mm.
I understand that chlorine and fluoride is part of the process.
Oh my God.
So again, you're going to eat low fat ham. Well, congratulations. You're eating
Oh
some
no.
more chlorine, you're eating some more fluoride, you know. So this has to be added into the mix.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking of which, on the subject of fats, I really wanted to ask you today about cholesterol because
Mhm.
I hear so many different opinions, polarized points of view about cholesterol. So I'm gonna to start you off on this. I'm going to ask you. I'm going to give you a multiple choice question on this. So, cholesterol, is it A, all bad? Is it B, some good, some bad? Is it C, all good? Or is it D, none of the above?
Gosh. Well, that's a hard question to answer.
Mm.
I mean, my tendency would be to say it's all good,
Yeah.
because every single part of it does a different job.
Mm.
Now, I've got two stories to tell about cholesterol, which I hope will throw some light on why I say all good. Um,
Brilliant.
First of all, this black and white low density lipoprotein LDL is bad, and high density is good. It's all too. This is good. This is black. This is white. Life is never like that, is it? Life is
Absolutely.
never
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
that's the first thing. And then there's all sorts of complications. Now they're saying, oh, it's the density of the molecules of cholesterol that's important, the size of the molecules that's
Hmm.
important. But if we just take one step back for a minute and do a quick biochemistry lesson and ask one basic question: what is cholesterol? Or, well, we know most cholesterol is produced in the liver.
Hmm.
Now, people go, oh, there's cholesterol in the diet. Yes, that's true. But generally speaking, it's a different cholesterol. So the cholesterol from butter, for example, is not the cholesterol we get from our liver. But there is an argument for saying that a few percent of cholesterol is in our food. So, but it's literally 2, 3, 4%.
Hmm.
So we're looking at least 95% of the cholesterol circulating in us is coming from our liver, right? It's made by
Wow. I used to think it was a bit less than that, about 80%, 75%, but
the
it's that high, is it?
high. It's that high. So
Wow.
it depends what kind of diet you have, but I'm talking about the average person. But if it got to 10% from food, I'd be quite surprised.
Hmm.
So so what is the liver making all this cholesterol for, right? Well, if you realize that it's the base material for all the hormones in our body,
Hmm.
right? And all the neurosteroids. Our brains are something like 50% cholesterol.
Hmm.
There's an excellent book by an author. I'm going to forget his name. It might be Blaylock. I might have got those. I might be wrong on that. But his book is called Lipitor, which is a well-known statin, The Thief of Memory. Okay. And so there's an argument, there's all sorts of things with statins, of course, is the other side of the equation, because
Yep.
statins help to block production of cholesterol from our liver. Okay, that's their function. Okay,
Hmm.
so there's our liver busy away producing all this cholesterol, and it relies, our bodies, this sounds a bit silly, I know, our body relies on us to eat the right foods that contain good enzymes and principally the B vitamins, especially B3, B6, B12, to methylate, that is, convert the cholesterol in our blood to a various hormone. And so you can think of it as a tree. If cholesterol is the stem of the tree, and as you go up the tree, all the different hormones are methylated, all the things you've heard of, like testosterone and estrogen and progesterone and all the hormones, they're all methylated, but they require different vitamins, different enzymes to reach a certain level. Okay.
Hmm.
So here's a theory of why we have high cholesterol. If we are low in a, I'll just use testosterone as an example, okay?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
if we are low in testosterone in our bodies, then the only way our body can really make more testosterone is produce more cholesterol, in the hope that we will get more methylated or that we might start eating the right foods that will help it to get more testosterone. Is there any evidence of this, what I'm saying? Well, yes, there is. There's evidence that the most classic, right, the absolute classic is niacin or
Hmm.
B3.
Yeah.
Okay, there's a few forms of B3, but niacin is the most powerful one. We can get into that if you want me to. Most people who would consume between 500 milligrams and a gram of B3, and of course there are foods that are rich in B3 too, right? We can go off and eat lots of them too. We'll see an almost immediate reduction in their cholesterol levels and a change in the balance.
Hmm.
Simply because, and the theory is, once let's say we do that and we're now making more testosterone, the liver backs off. The liver says, oh, thank goodness, we've got enough testosterone. We don't need to keep making all this cholesterol.
Hmm.
And conversely, and there's a guy, an American doctor called Sergey Zugan, DZUGAN, Sergey Zugan, he's written a number of books on this subject coming from the other direction, where he has a patient in front of them. Oh, you're low testosterone, does all the biomarkers, including cholesterol, gives them testosterone, and watches their cholesterol come down. That's just an example. I'm not saying it's always testosterone, you understand.
Hmm. Yeah, sure.
So there's two angles, right? So there's one strong theory. We have high cholesterol levels because we're lacking a hormone or hormones, and that when we get them back through various means, the cholesterol comes back to normal. And a second theory, and I got this from a guy who was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine on it, so I'd like to think he does know what he's talking about. He's a lovely guy, I know him well. Is Dr. Rich Lippman, and Rich wrote a book called Stay 40, which I'd recommend anyone has a look at. But he's a free radical expert. And what he's told me was, he says, after melatonin, which is a hormone our body produces,
Hmm.
cholesterol just happens to be the second most powerful antioxidant that our body produces.
Wow.
And it's particularly effective against the two worst free radicals that we can produce naturally. And those are known as superoxidase and the hydroxyl radicals. Okay. So he theorizes that in some people, something is occurring in their body that is generating a lot of free radicals. And the body is responding by producing plenty of cholesterol to neutralize, in other words, put the fire out.
Hmm.
And along comes a doc who says, oh my goodness, your cholesterol levels are high. Take this statin and we'll get your cholesterol levels down. And there are numerous patients who, almost despite the dose of statins they take, still have high cholesterol levels.
Hmm. That's incredible. I recently saw a piece on Sky News they did with a very elderly couple, probably in their 80s, and the wife had dementia, quite bad, and you saw the husband looking after it. It was all very sad. And at the end of all this, the old guy, turns to the reporter and says, "If only everyone starts taking statins in their 30s." this can be avoided.
And yet, the very fact that she's on statins has probably inhibited the cholesterol in her brain, leading to the senile dementia. And
Yes.
the tragedy in the UK is that if you're I'm over 55, that's probably obvious. And I went down to the pharmacy. Oh, we've got some statins for you. I said, why? Well, because everyone over 55 gets them. I said, but doc doesn't even know what my cholesterol levels are. But everyone can have them. I said, I don't want them. It's crazy. It's really foolish. But oh goodness. But the other thing we're told, if you were in Sweden, for example, and you were given statins, they would insist that you take coenzyme Q10, CoQ10, okay, because
Yeah.
that's also produced by the liver. If you're in Germany, they would strongly recommend you would take CoQ10. If you're in England, nobody says anything to you, right? And
Unbelievable.
yet what happens, you see, is they're inhibiting the cholesterol through the statin, and at the same time, they're inhibiting CoQ10. What's one of the prime functions of CoQ10? Well, apart from it being heavily involved in the mitochondria, which are the energy organelles in every cell of our body, really, really important stuff, they also have an important role in heart health. How many people do you know are on statins with normal cholesterol levels who have heart attacks?
Yeah.
Oh, how's that happening? It's because they depleted their CoQ10. If somebody out there has fallen for the statin story and wants to take them, and because they've listened to the high priestess or priest in the hospital wearing the white coat, please, please, please take CoQ10 as well.
Right.
And don't mess about with 20 or 30 or 40. Take a minimum of 100 milligrams.
Hey, do we get to a certain point in life where we stop producing CoQ10?
I don't know. I've never heard anyone say that we don't produce any. And to be honest with you, Paul, I do like to know about what changes with aging, and I've never heard anyone, but I would have a reasonable bet with you that I bet you our production levels decline, because in the main, not all, as we get older, most things decline in us. The production of X, Y, and Z decline. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with CoQ10. But guess what? CoQ10's it can be found in foods. And of course, it's available in supplements as well.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so just to recap on statins, I could put you on the spot here to a certain extent, but it just seems like it's is it gross incompetence or is it something else? Because I mean, how could you be that incompetent and launch all that on a country? It's just incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of dogma and vested interest, and things are very slow to change. I mean, the bloody dental industry is still offering people mercury amalgams
I know.
if you want them.
Crazy.
And the writing was on the wall 50 years ago. So what on earth is going on? So and they're loath. And the other thing, you think of smoking, right? How many years were we told smoking is unhealthy, blah blah, but they're still carried on because nobody wanted to admit that it was unhealthy. Because the moment a cigarette manufacturer admitted their product was dangerous, they laid themselves wide open to huge suits. So no, they're very, very slow and reluctant to change any of these things, and it just carries on through. I'm not saying, I don't think it's a deep conspiracy, but it's just dogma, vested interest, laziness, as well. That's okay. I actually spoke to two UK doctors not that long ago who were actually a husband and wife, and they were retiring, and over 35 years they had practiced medicine since leaving university. And I asked them if they would write down the top 20 drugs that they prescribed, and they did. And I then asked them how many of them were they prescribing when they left medical school, and they were quite shocked because they realized that 90% of what they were prescribing 35 years later were exactly the same things they were prescribing when they left medical school.
Wow.
And I only say that because there are not many technologies in this day and age where you can say that. If we asked a photographer what kind of equipment he's using now, what kind of equipment was using 35 years ago, don't think that, to any field. But in medicine, it's very slow to change. In
Yeah,
therapeutics, not in surgery, but in therapeutics.
therapeutics. So I was going to say, I completely agree with you there. But at the same time, speed of science, they're able to whip out an experimental jab very, very, very quickly, aren't they? So
Ah, what an amazing piece of work. I mean, those 8 mice that they tested it on must be very difficult.
yeah, exactly. Okay, let's move. Yeah,
That's a
absolutely.
very deep rabbit hole.
Yeah. I was
And
going
no,
to
I
talk to
haven't.
you. I was going to talk to you about supplements briefly. As you know, I've told you before we started recording that I run a herbs and supplements company. So I'm taking magnesium, which has really helped me with all sorts of things like leg
Yeah,
cramps, restless leg syndrome. The list goes on. Um,
good stuff.
Fulvic minerals, I really like fulvic minerals. A great way of getting trace elements and
Yeah,
electrolytes into the system. I'm taking Clive de Cole's targeted selenium, which is
okay.
a very interesting supplement.
Hmm.
I believe back in the 80s, they were getting people off heroin with an extremely high success rate
Okay.
before that was shut down. I'm doing ascorbic acid. I'm
Hmm.
doing 5,000 IUs of vitamin D3 a day.
Hmm.
I'm also doing K2 at the moment. I'm
Good.
actually taking more supplements than I've ever took before.
I'm glad
But
you're taking K2 with a high level of D3
yeah,
to prevent calcification,
yeah,
because that's an issue as we get older. Things get
yeah,
calcified, our
yeah.
cartilage gets calcified, leading to a lot of joint pain. Actually, a
Mhm,
lot of people think it's cartilage loss, and it's actually over calcification that
mhm,
stretches the nerves in the joints to an unnatural position. And so
mhm.
every time we move a bit, we go ow, ow, ow. So that's
Yeah,
and of course, arteries calcification is well known.
mhm,
So not good news. Hardened
mhm.
arteries are not good news. Um, I have a nice little story about blood. Do you want to do a
Yes,
story
please.
about blood?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Phil.
Folks listening, we're going in all directions here. We don't, with nothing's planned. um, this is one of my favourite stories, actually. So, and these are borne out by statistics. So, a man up until the age of 50 has twice the risk of a heart attack or stroke of a woman up until the age of 50. Okay,
Mhm.
that's a
Yeah.
fact. That's well, it's borne out in the figures.
Mhm.
However, past the age of 50, women catch us up. And by the time women are 60 ish, thereabouts, they have an equal risk of heart attack or stroke than we do.
Okay.
So, what on earth is going on there? Right.
Mm.
And there was a brilliant book written some years ago by a now late cardiologist, American cardiologist, by the name of Kenneth Kenzie. You can go and find it on Amazon. It will be very cheap because they're still in print, but they've been out a long time, and it's called The Blood Thinner Cure. And he evaluated at that time all the known markers, so cholesterol, HbA1c, triglycerides, homocysteine, all the things that the docs look for in blood
Mhm.
as a risk of a heart attack or stroke. And his conclusion was that there were two markers that were way more important to know than anything else, and they were your blood viscosity, i.e., how thin is your blood,
Mhm.
and your arterial stiffness. And that if you maintained soft arteries and thin, inverted commas, blood, your risk of a heart attack or stroke was minimized despite anything else.
Right.
Okay. So everybody knows to take aspirin for thin blood. And in an emergency situation or scare, I would suggest that's okay. However, it is not a good long term solution because it induces bleeding in the stomach.
Mhm.
So if you feel a bit funny, maybe that's the right thing to do. But if I wouldn't suggest it's something you do every day for years and years and years. So anyway, going back to the men, there are all sorts of things that thin blood. Even garlic thins blood, right? So in chilies thin blood, right? Anyway, but I want to finish this story for you. So
Mhm.
basically, how do you thin? What's an easy way to thin blood that's altruistic and is proven fact? That is give blood. If you give a pint of blood every 6 months, you will thin your blood considerably.
Wow.
Okay. What
Yeah.
does a woman do up to the age of about 50 that we don't do? She menstruates. She
Yes.
gives blood every month.
Wow.
And it is theorized that in doing so, one, she is releasing toxins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And two, because the bone marrow has to produce more blood to make up the difference, she has effectively thinned her blood. Now, there is a very expensive piece of equipment called a rheologics machine, which you can actually measure the viscosity of your blood. But I would humbly suggest, having given blood many times myself, there's an easy way to do it. And that is when you go and lie down and they stick the thing in your arm, it's a gravity fed machine, right? I'm sure you've all done it. It sort of rocks and it's gravity fed. The nurse will take your time to stopwatch. Just ask for the time.
Mm-hmm.
How did I do today? Oh, you were 3 minutes 40 seconds. Oh, thanks. And I've had conversations with numerous times, and they tell me, oh yeah, we get a young girl in here. We get a 19-year-old girl in here. She's in and out in 2 minutes. Gone. Pint of blood given.
Mm.
Get a 78-year-old man who doesn't look to perhaps be in the best state of health. Actually, it's probably a bit too old. I don't think they take them past 75 anymore. Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but you know what I mean.
Mm.
And they might be here for 15, 20 minutes in the chair, you know. So that's a way. So I theorize that by monitoring your time, if it's staying around the same or coming down, you're thinning your blood. If it's going up, you've probably got thicker blood because it's only gravity that's drawing the blood and your heartbeat as well, I accept. But I'm just saying it's a basic way to keep it. So are there any statistics that show that if men give 1 pint of blood every 6 months, it helps them? Well, yes, because the statistics show that we men will halve our risk of a heart attack or stroke by donating a pint of blood every 6 months.
I'm on that.
Right?
Brilliant. That's a great piece of advice. Yeah.
And you help somebody else, right? If they ever need
Yeah.
your blood, and you get tea and biscuits. So it's all good.
Happy day. That's fantastic. Actually, I'll tell you a story if you like. I've got a story for you. It's about vitamin B12. I've got a friend who was a commercial airline pilot for over 40 years. And about 2 or 3 years ago, he was coming up for retirement. And he was landing the plane and parking up. And then he was thinking to himself, I can't remember the descent. I've got no memory of it.
Gosh.
Oh dear. And then he started thinking to himself, my dad had dementia. This isn't looking too good. I'm very concerned. So fortunately, he's a very, very intelligent guy. And he started looking into this for himself. And he found that the symptoms or signs of, the symptoms of dementia are often a B12 deficiency. Same thing. So he managed to source some a good quality B12 supplement at a good dose, and within a week or two, the symptoms completely gone, and he was absolutely 100% again.
Nice.
So after all that, I'm asking myself, how many times have people gone to their doctor and said, "I've got no memory of this. My memory's on the way up." Blah blah blah, and they end up being diagnosed with a neurological disorder and placed on very strong toxic drugs. I mean, how many times has that happened?
Right.
It's frightening to even contemplate.
Yes. And also in many cases they're using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, right? And it's dreadful. I could tell you the story of Michael J. Fox if you want to hear it.
Sure, yeah.
So when I lived in America in the 90s, I was in a research group, and it was actually suggested to us, because Michael J. Fox was in his late 30s and had developed what is basically a form of Parkinson's, and he was, by all intents and purposes, a clean living boy. He didn't smoke, he didn't drink excess alcohol, he'd never taken any narcotics. He looked healthy. Everyone knows what he looked like in Back to the Future, right? I mean, he looked like a teenager, even though he was 20 years on top of it.
It didn't look very healthy in Teen Wolf, but carry on.
Well, yeah. But there was one peculiar. He was actually at that time the poster boy for Coca-Cola. He was the guy in the advert selling Coca-Cola, and his friends even called him the Coca-Cola King, because, of course, being paid copious amounts of money they also gave him free product, and apparently he would drink like 15, 20 cans of Diet Coke every day.
Oh,
So
dear.
he just guzzled it, apparently. That was the only peculiar thing that you could say about his lifestyle and diet. Well,
Right.
strangely, at that time, the Germans had developed a drug called memantine, which is what is called an excitotoxin blocker. So there are these excitotoxins that can accumulate in the brain for all kinds of reasons. A lot of them are lifestyle choices. So the worst thing you can, if you want to get your excitotoxins flushed in your brain, and it tends to have a sort of fogging effect. If you're, I'm not saying it's always the case, but if you've got high levels of, you tend to feel fogged, and you know exactly what the feeling is, because I'll tell you what the one of the number one ways to get them going is, and that is consuming monosodium glutamate. So you know the feel after, you know, maybe you go in the Chinese restaurant and say no MSG, but if you haven't done that and they've thrown it in the food, you know what it feels like afterwards, don't you?
Yeah.
You feel a bit fogged, you feel a bit
Mm.
lethargic,
Mm-hmm.
and you feel hungry again.
Mm.
You know, you've eaten two, I don't know, chicken and an egg fried rice, but you still feel hungry. Well,
Yeah.
that's MSG, but it creates, and certain broths will do it. But here's another big one that does it. It's a little thing called aspartame.
Yes, which is a neurotoxin, isn't it? Yeah.
So we surmised that he had
Mm.
he had too high levels of aspartame, and
Yeah.
that caused the brain damage. So,
Wow.
you know, anyway, that's a whole nother rabbit hole to go
Mm.
down. But there's
Mm.
no point in thinking that all the natural, so-called, or not say natural, all the artificial sweeteners are safe.
Mm.
They're
Well,
not.
from my understanding, I think the majority aren't, are they?
No, I mean, you know, I mean, there's some reasonable ones like stevia,
Yeah, yeah.
xylitol.
Mhm.
Xylitol's a real weird one because it's the only one that's good for your teeth, um, which is kind of weird one. And the what's the other one that's extremely sweet, but it comes from the leaf? Was that stevia? I can't think of it. But I would certainly avoid aspartame. Don't, you
Definitely,
know, you
definitely.
don't go near it. Unfortunately, of course, it's no good having a soda, a pure, yeah, what is it, 27 teaspoonfuls of sugar
Something ridiculous like
in a
that.
small
Yeah,
bottle
it's
of Coca-Cola. I
crazy.
mean, it's
Yeah,
unbelievable.
yeah, absolutely.
Unbelievable.
Just before we move on, just going back to the B12 thing, with my friend, he's a meat eater,
Hmm.
so and his diet's pretty good. So
That's strange, isn't it?
it is strange, and I wondered how could he have a B12 deficiency? Well, we're assuming he's had a B12 deficiency because of the effect that the B12 had on him afterwards. But what could cause a B12 deficiency in someone who regularly eats? You know,
Well, was again, we started at the top of the show. Is it the quality of the meat he's eating?
mm,
Right? Is he eating good quality stuff? If he isn't, he should be buying the organic or going to the farm shops and getting it direct from source. I would
mhm,
suggest.
mm,
Um, are they being grass fed and not being forced and all the rest of it, or is there something else going on in his body which is blocking the effects of
absorption
B12?
of the
Are there
B12.
toxins or other issues at play? The work of, this is slightly left field here, Paul, but the work of a guy called Professor John Ionescu. He's a German guy. He's got an amazing hospital quite close to Munich, 200-bed hospital. Now he specializes in skin disorders, the really serious stuff. Okay,
Mhm,
but
mhm,
he's an amazing guy because he, within a year, he will turn everybody around. No more psoriasis, no more eczema, no more whatever the problem was. And they could be some of the most severe cases. He once showed me a picture of a guy standing in his underwear and said, Phil, what do you think this man's got? Well, he was clearly a Caucasian man, but he was black from head to foot. And I looked at it and I said, John, I don't know. I said, but I'm going to guess and say this poor man's been in a burning building, hasn't he? Isn't this third-degree burns? And he said,
mm.
no, it's psoriasis. It's just the worst you'll ever see.
My God.
Okay. And he can turn everyone around. So how does he turn everybody around in a year? And weirdly, they never get this problem again. He discovers what toxins are in them and what allergies they have. And so they basically set about a protocol to eliminate the toxins and to avoid the allergies. Okay. And once they've done that, their immune system's back on top. So let's say it was gluten. Let's just pick an obvious one, say gluten. They come off the wheat, they come off the gluten. They could even go back to eating a little bread again and never get the problem again because now their immune system's on top, it's not down below. And so
Mhm,
as I say, he does the most remarkable work. And
mm,
I'm convinced that there are many other problems that we have in health today that are also the result of allergies and or toxins.
Right. And there's a strong link between gut health, isn't there, and allergies, as I understand it anyway. One of the first things I'd say to people if they've got something like psoriasis or eczema is, what are you eating?
Yeah.
What's your gut health like? Because
Yeah,
quite often that
yeah.
can be the issue.
Absolutely. I often, when I get folks, especially friends, they come to me and say, "Oh, I've got this problem, that problem. I'm going to go off and see the doctor." I sometimes, medical doctor, I sometimes say, "Why?" And what do you mean, why? I said, "Why don't you go and see a nutritionist,
Mm,
first, or,
mm,
or any other of the plethora of health professionals that are out
mm,
there? Why do you want to go and consume a drug first?" I'm
mm.
not against all drugs, I'm
Yeah,
not
I know,
against all drugs, but
yeah.
there's a synergy between. I could tell you a bit about the Turkish system, which I quite like actually, because
Okay.
they call it complementary medicine. In other words, they don't mind you taking 27 grams of intravenous vitamin C or
Hmm.
something like that. Whereas in England, they would say, "Oh, that's not evidence based," which is BS, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of PubMed references about vitamin C. What they're really saying is that hasn't been approved by our government, but that doesn't make it scientific. That's just regulatory. Okay. Anyway, I'm detouring again, but there are lots of choices. If you start looking around the world, and this is it, how do you find the time? You're a busy man. Your friend's an airline pilot, right? He's a busy man. He's got lots of things to do. So why would he be spending, I don't know, 2 days a week looking at the health matters? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
and so that's why they say, well, it doesn't matter because I'll go to the doctor. That's what they're there for. But anyone that's looked into how the pharmaceutical industry got founded by John D. Rockefeller and Carnegie will soon be apparent that it's a kind of monopoly, really. I'm saying it's not all bad, but if only they would merge some of those drugs with some of the naturals we have, the effects would be brilliant. The synergy would be fantastic, and the
Would
side
that
effects would be lowered.
cut into their profits in any way if they did that?
Oh, yes, I would think so.
Mm.
It's the thin end of the wedge, which is
Yeah.
why they don't want it to happen, or
Mm.
some of them don't want it to happen. But there
Yeah.
are really, don't get me wrong, there are really good docs out there
Hmm.
that are trying their very best to
Hmm.
do things. One of the problems we have in the UK, I mean, I'll be honest, if I look at most of my clients, most of my clinics and doctor clients, they're mostly Americans. Okay. Because things are very different now. You might not like some of the way they do their system, you have to pay for it and blah blah blah, but they're more open. 95% of the medical market in the UK is under the NHS, and that's Hobson's choice.
Mm.
You do this or you don't. I could tell you a story about my wife getting involved with that. You go down this road. Any other choices? No.
Mm.
Oh, okay.
Mm.
And then you have to opt out and pay for it, right? I mean, of course, most
Yeah.
people paying 40% taxes, they feel they've already paid in, and rightly so.
Yeah. I mean, from my point of view, when you start learning about the pharmaceutical industry and how it was set up, as you say, by the Rockefellers and how it works, it's a great motivation to just research this stuff for yourself. And I don't know if you agree with the idea of becoming your own doctor,
Yeah,
um,
yeah,
but that's kind of like how I approach things now. Obviously, if I get knocked over by a bus, I want the ambulance to come. I want it to take me to A&E to see some specialist doctors in there. But outside of that, I'm trying to avoid any sort of interaction with the medical system.
sure. But there's a world of difference, Paul, between surgical applications and fixing broken bones, etc., and therapeutics for what we're talking about are degenerative diseases. Okay,
Hmm.
there's a world of difference between them.
Okay.
Um, in the main, if you think about all diseases, they come into four categories. They're either infectious disease, right? They're genetic disease, they are a trauma, an accident, or they're degenerative. And if you look at all the major countries of the world and the amount of money that they spend on those, they're spending between 75 and 90% on degenerative disease,
Mm.
which we can argue are the diseases of aging. right? Not many 20-year-olds with Alzheimer's disease, are there, or arthritis or whatever?
No, no.
It's extremely rare if it is. So, they are the diseases of aging. So imagine making even a dent in that. You're making an enormous improvement. I'm just talking fiscal at the moment. Obviously, there are all many other benefits from, but let me put it this way. If you're interested in buying a new car, what do? Do you walk into the first showroom you see and say, sell me a car? And the guy goes, that one's a very nice one, red. And you go, I'll take it. Do you do that? I don't think so. I think most people, they perhaps read a magazine, they go on the internet, maybe they ask somebody with a similar car, how do you find that car? Blah, blah, blah. Or maybe they go for some test drives and before you make a decision, right?
Yeah.
But when it comes to medicine, most people walk into the first doctor's office who perhaps sends them off to the consultant at the hospital and they do exactly what they say the following week and never question it.
Yes. Crazy
Right?
world. Yeah, absolutely.
It's a strange area that when it comes to medicine, we often just throw ourselves at them and say, "Oh, do what you want."
Yeah. Just something that you said a moment ago triggered something in my mind. You were talking about dementia being extremely rare in people in their 20s or their 30s, etc. I read somewhere a little while ago that around about 100 years or so ago in this country, if a child had cancer, you would get doctors from miles and miles and miles to come and see this child because it's so rare. And yet today we live in a world where every single hospital has a ward full of children with cancer.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Or autism.
Yeah, or autism. So what do you think has been the main catalyst in making that happen?
Well, food, possibly stress, and adjuncts that are used in things that get injected into people because they believe they're stopping a disease from occurring.
Right. Okay. That's
Because the big V's, I'm trying to make sure you don't get blocked on Facebook or anything.
sure.
The big V's of today are not the same as when they were when they started.
Yeah.
There's lots of other stuff in them.
It's a whole different science. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you go and look at the work of Professor Chris Exley, Exley, who was at the University of Kiel until they pulled all his funding because they didn't like the things his science was showing. He's a world aluminium expert. There's hardly anybody in the world knows more about aluminium than Professor Exley. Go and look him up. He's on YouTube. Good guy. I had the pleasure to meet him once, and he's saying the same thing. Is that you get aluminium can cause when we eat aluminium, and we do because it's the most abundant metal in the, it is in food, okay, because it's the most abundant metal in the planet. When we eat it, our body knows exactly how to detoxify it. When we inject it into ourselves, it can't deal with it.
Right.
Okay, and you know where that comes from.
Yeah.
The only bit of good news on this is he discovered that silica is very good at detoxifying aluminium,
Right.
and he found 3 mineral waters that are naturally high in silica. Do you want me to mention the brand names?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's Volvic from France,
Yeah.
Spritzer from, I believe, Indonesia, and Fiji from Fiji. Now, he's done trials where he gave even Alzheimer's patients 2 or 3 liters of those waters a day and showed statistical improvements in them within a month.
Wow, that's incredible. What about the tap water? Because the tap water contains aluminium sulfate, which, as I understand it, is the only reason why the tap water is clear, is because they use aluminium sulfate. So if we're ingesting that all the time, if we're
Yeah,
drinking tap water, is
yeah.
that
Well, you're not just ingesting that, unfortunately. It depends, of course, where you're living. We'll talk about the UK. It depends, of course, where you're living in the UK as to whether they're using chlorine or not, whether they're using fluoride or not. I read a little while back that the government wanted to compulsory fluorinate everybody. I don't know what happened to that in the end.
they do that? Sorry, Phil. They do that every I don't know 5 or 6 years. They bring that story out. Oh, we're going to make sure everyone's got fluoride in their water because we really care about your teeth.
I know.
And they do that every 5 or
And
6
yeah,
years. It goes very quiet. It's very
the
odd.
studies are so BS. So first of all, it's well known fluoride is a rat poison. It is used to kill rats. right?
Yeah.
And you go, oh yes, but the concentrations are way above what you have in your toothpaste. Yeah, but you don't. Perhaps we brush our teeth every day. We drink water every day.
It's a
What if you're a
cumulative.
baby? What if
Yeah.
you're a child? What if you're a pregnant woman? What
Hmm.
what if what if what if? You know the story of fluoride?
Might do. Tell us anyway.
All right. So I warned you about me. Too many stories. So in the rush to make an atomic bomb during the Second World War, I don't know the science, but apparently you need fluoride to enrich the uranium to make a bomb. So the Americans, of course, hush hush, biggest secret in the world at the time, um, had a fluoride plant in New Jersey. They rushed this thing up, top secret, make us copious quantities of fluoride and get it over to us in Nevada ASAP so we can build this bomb. And
Mm.
it was apparently belching out clouds of white smoke, so much so that the fields round the plant, which used to have apricot trees and horses and cows and all the rest of it, a very farming area, got a fine dust. It looked like a sprinkling of snow on it. And the farmers said the trees started dying, the cows had arthritis, and the horses were sick, and and people weren't doing that well either. But they couldn't do anything about it because it was all hush hush war, and that was that.
Mm.
But what also happened, just out of interest, a side story, I quite like this from a history perspective. As you know, the Americans and ourselves were providing materials to the Russians in the fight against Nazi Germany, coming the northern convoys, and suddenly the Russians started asking for fluoride, and of course the secret boys went, "Holy cow! Maybe they're making an atomic bomb."
Mm.
Sugar, get people over there and find out what they want, all these tons of fluoride they keep asking us for. So they did. And they discovered, because the Russians had millions of German men in POW camps,
Yeah.
these virile, you know, enemy at the
Mm.
time in these camps. They discovered that if they put fluoride in their drinking water, it made them docile and compliant.
Yes. Yes.
That's interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Anyway,
Very.
so that aside, of course the Americans came back and they're not making an atomic bomb, but we'll make a note of that.
Yeah.
And so anyway, what happened was after the war, the the farmers got together and said, right, we're going to sue this factory for making all this fluoride because it's destroyed our crops and cattle and all the rest of it. So the American government went to, I believe it was the University of Pennsylvania, don't quote me on that, but it was one of them, and said, find something good to say about fluoride. And they found this tenuous link that it would actually assist with teeth, which isn't true because if you get over fluorinated, your teeth go bloody clear.
Mm. Mm.
That's a known fact as well. But it was really
Fluorosis,
quite
isn't it?
tenuous.
It's fluorosis, they call it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Fluorosis.
that's it. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
But the thing was, they redacted. So they got these statements like the workers in the fluoride factory had fewer blank blank fillings blank blank than the average in the population. Well,
Mm.
75 years later, we're able to look at those blank blank blanks, and it turns out they had fewer fillings in their teeth, these workers, because they had fewer teeth.
Mm.
Teeth
Crazy.
fell out. They had
Um,
to change their hobnail boots to rubber boots because, as you know, the stuff was all over the floor. And as they were moving around, it was corroding the metal in the boot.
Unbelievable.
That's what
Um,
fluoride does.
yeah, we're talking about sodium fluoride, aren't we? Which is a
Yes.
synthetic compound.
Thank you for
Now,
pointing that
whenever I read mainstream articles and they're trying to promote the idea of fluoride in water, they'll say fluoride is a naturally
out.
occurring mineral.
Thank you for pointing that out. No, you're absolutely. Thank you. There is natural fluoride, but it is not, as you
Yes.
rightly point out, sodium fluoride, which is a byproduct of aluminium smelting,
Hmm.
which in the old days they had to pay for as a hazardous goods, and now are delighted that they get paid by other people to take it away and throw it in toothpaste, etc.
Mm. Mm.
And good point. Thank you.
I think I read somewhere once that the United Nations decided that they couldn't dump sodium fluoride in the oceans because it's just too toxic. So they decided to filter it through us instead.
Yeah, we're cheap filters, aren't we?
Yeah, it's a crazy world, isn't it? Okay, let's move
But
on.
it's in the water, and so that's another reason not to drink tap water. And just to finalise on that point of tap, why do I want to buy mineral water? What a waste of money! I've got a tap in my house. The other thing, the Germans, they went to all their states and they randomly went to taps and they analysed the water and they found in every single state there were traces of all the common prescription drugs. Because
Yeah.
when we urinate out, they do not have the facility to remove. So if our neighbors are taking statins and Viagra, and yes, we have hard water, yes, that's the joke, but and all the other drugs, and what's the number one prescribed drug in the world? It is the contraceptive pill.
Contraceptive pill, yeah.
That's what we
Yeah.
call an endocrine disruptor.
Yeah. That's
Changes the balances of estrogens and progesterones. What does that do in a man? What does that do in a child? What does that do in a pregnant woman? What does it, the list goes on and on. And then people go, yes, but they're in the millions and the billions. That's true in parts per million. Yeah, that's true. But you're drinking water every day, aren't you? You're washing
mm-hmm.
in that same water every day, aren't
Mm-hmm.
you?
Mm.
How many years does it take?
Yeah, it's accumulative, definitely. Yeah, at the moment, I'm distilling my water, but I'm
Mhm.
adding a couple of drops of fulvic minerals to,
Okay.
every couple of litres or whatever. So I'm
Mhm.
remineralising the water.
Nice.
Sometimes I use Celtic salt, things like
Yeah.
that. So hopefully I've got that right.
Good.
I don't
I
think
love to put magnesium in a bath. I love it. Who doesn't like a bath, right? Who doesn't
there's
like climbing into a nice warm bath and say, I'm doing nothing for half an hour? Lovely. You know, and have a soak in the tub. Well, have a soak in the tub with Epsom salts, and the water will go lovely and soft. So you get lots of nice lather on your soap. And when you get out, I'm sure you know this, Paul, your muscles are lovely and relaxed.
it's
And
a
you'll have
lovely.
a really good night's sleep as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think, as I understand it, I think it's Dead Sea salts that contain even more magnesium than Epsom salts. But Epsom salts is better for getting the toxins out, aren't they?
Yeah, that's a good point. I once went in the Dead Sea, so and I've had a lie in the Dead Sea, so I don't know whether it is more magnesium or not, but it wouldn't
Mm,
surprise me if it
yeah,
was.
I think so.
But no, and you know about if you get pins and needles, then your body really wants it. If you
Mm,
put magnesium directly on oil or something or directly onto your, and if you get, as you know, if you get cramps often, that's a
yeah,
sure sign that you need or migraines often. It's a
yeah.
sure sign it's probably magnesium.
I think we're probably right. Well, I think Clive de Carle is right when he says that we're living in a time where there's a magnesium deficiency epidemic going on at the moment. Basically, the vast majority of people I think are deficient, as he points out, because we burn it when we're stressed.
That's right.
And if we look at the last 2.5 years, who
Uh,
hasn't been stressed?
there's
So
also the soils are depleted.
yeah,
We've over. Well, it's not agriculture anymore, is it? It's agribusiness. I heard
mm,
somebody call it agribusiness the other day. I thought, oh, don't like that. But
mm,
the soils, even back to the 1940s, which could be the time when at least Britain was healthiest because we had to eat organic. We didn't
yeah,
eat that much,
mm,
and we changed with the seasons and all the rest of it. But but now if they've done studies of the soils then and the soils now, and we've got like 50% less selenium,
mm, mm,
and other minerals. They've all gone
mm,
down in normal soil
mm.
since what 60, 70 years.
Yeah, iodine's another big one, isn't it? That used to be in the soil. You used to be able to get that from leafy green vegetables and
Yeah,
things like that. Um, I've read somewhere that if you're living by the sea on the coast, then you're probably going to be okay in terms of your iodine levels. But most
that
people living inland are going to be deficient now.
that's true. And
Yeah,
also in the old days again, and you were living on the coast, one of the things you'd have eaten quite often would have been seaweed.
yeah, sure.
And that's one of the
Yeah.
strongest sources of iodine, of course.
And the in Japan, they do not have a word, as I understand it, for menopause. They have no word for it
I
because of
I
their
don't know.
iodine-rich diet.
I
They're
don't
because they're eating the seaweed all the time and the sushi, etc. I think at least 9 out of 10 women do not suffer with any symptoms of the
know.
menopause, and there isn't even a word for menopause in Japan.
I don't know. I got a Japanese girl works for me. I'll ask her. But
Yeah.
the um, but of course the Japanese, of course, are by nature the longest lived race on the planet.
Mm,
And there's a
yeah.
number of reasons why that's considered to be the case. One is they eat a lot of fish. Um, we won't mention the whales. Secondly, they have some of their foods which are anathema to us, like nattokinase, for
Mm,
example,
mhm,
which is a blood thinner, right? Very
mm,
powerful blood thinner, and other things. And one of the more controversial, and they eat brown rice specifically rather than white rice. It's not as starchy or as such a simple carbohydrate as white rice is. And the other thing that I found very fascinating, and in fact it was Professor John Ionescu, who I mentioned him earlier, when they eat, what are they eating with? The only thing made of metal is the knife. Everything else is made of wood. So they're putting wood into their mouths because the knife is for cutting, and then everything else is wood. So they're not ingesting as much heavy metals as we do.
Yeah, I've often wondered that. That's very interesting. Thanks for that. Okay, we best move on. So, shall we talk next about melatonin? Because one of the big problems that people come to me with is insomnia. That's so common at the moment. It's crazy. Very few people are getting quality sleep anymore. So, could you tell us how to go about increasing the levels of melatonin? It's our pineal gland, isn't it, that makes melatonin?
It is.
Yeah.
Although the gut also makes melatonin, but
Oh,
nobody is quite sure why or how. But you're absolutely right. The pineal gland, which is right in the center of our brain. So if we paint a dot like the Hindus do, I think they call it the bindu or the bindi here, which
Bindi, yeah.
represents the third eye, which is the pineal, and then you do top of your ears. And if you were to dissect that, that's the center of your head, and that's or center of your brain, and that's where the pineal gland, which is about the size of a pea, so it's not a big thing, resides. And it does make melatonin, and it makes melatonin at night when in the dark, I should say, because you could be in the daytime, but if you're in a dark space, you'll start making melatonin. And its main function probably is to let our bodies know when it's day and when it's night. And why does our body want to know that? Because all these different hormones in us are coming out at different times of the day, mostly first thing in the morning. So that's why when we get up, we should have some energy to get up and get on with the day. And of course, when we go the other way, so it's all based on how it was with us going round and the sun coming up and down. So light entering the eye will destroy melatonin, with one exception, and that is lunar light and starlight.
Nice.
But again, if going back 10,000 years, you're going to be lying out in a field under a tree, that's what you're going to see. And yet you went to sleep soundly. So it's just all going back to nature. So how can we, so just very quickly, if we're on a nice, healthy circadian rhythm, day, night, etc., our hormonal cyclicity will be good. And so melatonin doesn't help us make more hormones, but it enables our body to release them at the right time.
Okay.
And if we've got hormonal cyclicity, we've got a very strong immune system. Basically, that's it essentially. And that's why we all know if you are jet lagged or you do shift work, you're kind of buggered up, right? And we have a lot of ladies who are on the planes and they can't, their menstrual cycles go awry, their fertility drops, and because their bodies, I was this week I'm in Australia, next week I'm in New York, the body doesn't quite know what to make of it all. So getting your melatonin corrected or help, sometimes it can take 3 months. Don't expect overnight result. First thing to know, melatonin is not a sleeping drug. If you were to take a melatonin supplement, it will not knock you out and put you to sleep. It could make you drowsy if you took too high a dose, but it's not a sleeping drug per se. So how can we naturally get our melatonin levels corrected? And yes, it's a hormone that goes down as we get older. Well, the easiest one is when you get into your bedroom at night, be in a black room. Don't have light coming through the curtains, right?
Talking of which, Phil, I'm going to have to turn my light on, otherwise my melatonin's going to kick in a minute. Sorry about that. 1 second.
That's all right. I'm afraid winter's coming.
Yeah, it's a funny time of year. Sorry about that.
We're putting it once we put those clocks forward next week. Oh dear.
Oh dear, yeah.
I always think that's when I should be off to Spain or somewhere. Anyway, but so be in a dark room, number one, right? Really important. So get some good blinds, good curtains, whatever. Or if you can't do that, if your partner's watching TV, reading a book, right? Put a blindfold on. Make sure you're in the dark, right? Okay. The second one is there's too many things in our bedrooms now that have flashing lights on them. Could be the fire alarm, could be the alarm clock, and don't put your mobile phone
Mobile
near
phone,
you.
I was gonna say, it's probably the most common thing people do now. It's whether their alarm is on their
Yeah,
mobile phone, everything's on there, isn't it?
yeah,
So I
yeah.
think
Not to mention
probably
all the fields that if it's right next to their head, all those
yeah,
fields are.
yeah, exactly.
Anyway,
It wouldn't surprise me if over 90% of people now sleep with their mobile phones right next to them, which
yeah,
is very, very
it
dangerous.
is. Put it
Yeah,
at least put it in airplane mode if you don't do anything else and all that sort of thing. But
sure.
the worst ones, the worst offenders are blue lights. Red lights don't seem to affect the pineal too much, but if you have a blue light that's blinking away or flashing away, I would suggest you either switch it off or put a bit of duct tape over it to
Mm,
cancel it out, whatever that situation is. So that would be helpful.
mm.
Strangely, the more sunlight you get in the daytime, the more melatonin you produce at night.
Yeah, I've read that. Yeah.
Okay.
Hmm.
Hey, it was good to get some sunshine, right? For all sorts of reasons, including vitamin D, of course. So
Yes.
that's handy. And the third one that is quite well known is don't drink too much caffeine, especially late in the evening,
Hmm.
because it will deplete your melatonin production.
Mm, mm,
So, don't have a cup of coffee after dinner. It's not really the right thing to do. Probably best to have you stick with your chamomile or jasmine tea,
mm.
something like that. So
Yeah,
there are three very simple things that
great.
everybody can do.
Yeah.
Um,
And I think there's melatonin-rich foods as well, aren't there?
yes, there are.
So, yeah.
Just of course, we can talk about supplements. It is
Mhm.
possible to take melatonin supplements. There is also now another option, which is a peptide, which I will tell you about if you're interested in that.
Definitely.
Um, but melatonin is, I would say, one of the most important. Somebody once played a game with me. Do you remember Desert Island Discs, where you supposedly go to a desert island and you can only take so many books, so many films and things with you, and it's a radio show, isn't it? And then
Mm,
the celebrities talk about what they would take and why. We used to play a similar game, but with supplements, and we'd say, listen, you're going to a perfect island. This island has got perfect water, perfect climate, perfect food. So you don't have to take any of those things with you, right? That's all there waiting for you. But you've got three supplements you can take. What would they be? And invariably, anybody I interviewed would always have melatonin
mhm.
in the list
Yeah, makes
because it
perfect.
has. Can you imagine once you've got your circadian rhythms back and all your hormones are functioning properly and your immune system's proper? Imagine how many good things happen
Yeah,
when
definitely.
when that's all in balance.
Yeah. Just out of
Virtually.
interest, what were the other 2 supplements people chose typically?
Well, it would vary on their the other that was the most ubiquitous one. The others would be chosen because of their speciality,
Right, okay.
or I mean, there's some of them would take other hormones, some
Yeah.
would take peptides. Some even said I'd still take extra vitamin C. I can't rely on the coconuts and the pineapples,
Mm.
or whatever. So
Mm,
it would depend on but the melatonin was invariably in everybody's list, which I just thought was fascinating.
yeah,
There's a
yeah.
lot of stuff about melatonin, which we've put in our magazine, which is called Aging Matters. So if anyone wants to have a look at agingmatters.com, you could download our magazines for free.
Is there
And
is Sorry, Phil. I was
mm,
just gonna ask you, is there a connection between melatonin or healthy melatonin levels and the big C?
yes, yes, and there's one big. Just very quickly before I tell you that, a good old friend of mine who's a real melatonin expert in the world is Dr. Walter Pierpoli. And Walter has written many of the books on melatonin. He was one of the very first to come out with the melatonin. The Melatonin Miracle was a book that came out in the 90s. If you want to get into this, read it because it's
Mhm.
still good, obviously. And Walter is a fabulous, lovely Italian gentleman. And I like accents, and there's nothing better on the ear than an Italian accent, is there? Because it's more like music than language, isn't it?
Mm,
And
mm.
he once said to me this, and please, any Italians listening, please excuse me, but I just like the sound. So he once said to me, Phil, think of melatonin and pineal gland. Pineal gland is like conductor. You have an orchestra and you have a no conductor. What do you have? You have a noise. But now you have orchestra and you have conductor with the pineal gland. What do you have? You have a music. And I always thought that was a great way
Yeah,
to, the endocrine system, all the glands in our body are fundamentally under a control of the pineal gland.
yeah.
When's it
That's
day? When's it night? When's it day? When's it night? Right?
yeah,
So now just quickly to get good night's sleep, we've talked about being in a black room, getting rid of blue lights and all that sort of thing, not drinking coffee, obviously, in the evening and that, or anything with too much caffeine. I mean, let's be, teas have caffeine too.
Mhm.
The other thing is, I would suggest, is a grandma's trick. What did grandma give us when we were kids? Warm milk or a warm cocoa, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, why? And why did that make us feel tired and sleepy? Well, in milk, there is tryptophan, and tryptophan is the precursor to serotonin. Melatonin is the postcursor to serotonin. So it's the bit on the end, whereas serotonin in the middle, which is a well-known hormone, and then the precursor is melatonin. Is tryptophan, L-tryptophan, which is an essential amino acid, one of the
Mhm.
8 essential amino acids. What does the word essential mean? It means if you don't get it, you die.
Mm.
So quite essential.
Mm.
Um,
Oh,
anyway, but
sorry, Phil. On that subject, I think I read somewhere that L-tryptophan, there's large amounts of that in turkey, which
yes,
is why everyone at Christmas has their turkey for dinner and then does
so
this in front
tired.
of the
That's true. Yeah,
family.
as a meat, yeah, that's absolutely true. But
Yeah.
when you heat milk, you just, slightly, you release a lot of tryptophan. So, and the cocoa as well, because it's mainly
Mhm.
made of milk anyway, isn't it? You put a bit of
Mm.
cocoa in and make it taste nice. So that's why grandma said drink a warm glass of milk before you go to bed, help you sleep.
Granny
Simple. Of
knows best.
course, you can take tryptophan supplement. You could, I suppose, have a turkey sandwich before you go to bed, maybe. But
I think I'll stick with the chocolate.
yeah,
Uh, I think I found out recently as well that chocolate is actually supposed to be high in oxalates, which can be a problem, can't it? Have you heard much about oxalates?
I haven't really, but again, there are different classifications of chocolate, aren't they? I mean, we're
Mm.
not talking about, how shall we call it, mass-produced chocolate with
Yeah,
lots of sugar and all. If you're getting real cocoa, you're going and
yeah,
getting 90% cocoa or something like that. It's a very
caffeine.
different story.
Yeah.
We used to measure arterial stiffness, and we could actually show people that if they'd eaten 2 or 3 chunks of very high cocoa chocolates, pure chocolates, we could actually see an improvement in their arterial stiffness.
Mm.
So that's nice. So that's good. That's a good superfood. That's a
Yeah,
good superfood.
definitely.
Everything in excess, everything in life is on a curve, and that curve is either bell shaped or U inverted, and it just means you want to be in the middle, right?
Hmm.
Too little water's dangerous, isn't it? And too much water's dangerous, right?
Yes,
You want to be
yes,
in the middle.
yeah,
It's. I think it's the same with everything.
yeah. And that's very interesting as well with water because there's so many people out there in the health arena, if you like, and drink water, drink water, drink more water, drink more water. But as I understand it, all the time your body is doing going through different processes and different chemical reactions, etc. And if we're constantly drinking water, that can interfere with those processes. Would you agree with that at all?
Yeah, you don't want to dilute yourself too much, do you?
Mm,
I mean,
mm,
the other thing is you will also be flushing yourself because by drinking more water, you're going to urinate more, obviously. So
yeah.
have you now urinated out too many minerals,
Mm,
right? Ever had sunstroke? What I had it once in my life when I was quite
mm,
young, actually. I had an awful experience. You've just
mm,
sweated and urinated out too many
mm,
minerals.
yeah.
So there's a level, that
Mm,
you don't want to go beyond. I mean,
yeah.
I think it's true to say that most people don't drink enough water,
Hmm.
right? And
Yeah.
too many people think, oh no, I got water, I had a beer, or I've had 12 cups of tea.
Mm,
That's not the same thing. You
no.
you need to drink water. But 2 or 3 liters, I would say, for most people is probably the right amount.
Great. Thanks for that. Okay, Phil, before we finish today, I really wanted one of the things that I really wanted to talk to you about was peptides.
Hmm.
I know that's something that's really caught your attention over the last few years. And you recently compared a moderated, what was it, the Profound Health Conference
That's right, I
in
did. Yeah,
London last month, I think it was.
that's right. Yes,
Um,
I did.
So this is something that's quite new on my radar. As I understand it, it's been developed or was originally developed in Russia.
Mhm.
All this. So could you explain what peptides are and how they could improve people's
Mm.
longevity?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, amino acids are the building blocks of life. We talked about L-tryptophan a moment ago, and there are quite a few of them out there. I'm sure your listeners know of many of them, and it then depends. Once they conjoin, they become a peptide. So once you have two amino acids that join together, they become a peptide. That's called a dipeptide.
Mhm.
And of course, it depends which two join, right? Because you've got all. I'm not a mathematician, but you can imagine how many variations you can have. And of course, then you could perhaps have three amino acids joining in all those combinations, or you could have four, or you could have five. They can go on very high numbers, but they tend to change the names. So once you get to a certain number of amino acids joined together, we start calling them proteins.
Mhm.
And then once you get even more joined on, we start calling them hormones. And the longest one that I'm aware of is human growth hormone, which I guess most people have heard about. And that is a amino acid chain of 191 amino acids. That's a lot.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And it means that you can't swallow it. If you wanted to get that into your body, you'd have to inject it. Okay. But once you come down to the smaller numbers, especially the very short ones that we're going to talk about in a moment, which are called bioregulators, and they're not longer than 4 amino acids, they can pass through the stomach wall. The Russians, or the Soviets, I should say, because this was all research done in the 80s and 90s,
Mhm.
and it was actually a Soviet military secret. So peptides are made up of amino acids. They are the building blocks of life. Some people say that in the primeval swamp, that when two amino acids first conjoined was information, was a message. And in 1981, when I was doing what was then called food and vitamin technology in London, I think we might call it nutrition now. The lecturer put up a slide and he showed what was typically in food. So there's X percentage of vitamins, pie chart, X percentage of vitamins, X percentage of minerals, X percentage of oils, X percentage of fiber. And I remember on that day looking at that, and it was like 55 or 60% fiber. And 1981, remember?
Mhm.
And I thought to myself on that day, well, fiber must be very important because nature doesn't waste anything. And if
Mhm.
most of food is fiber, what's it all doing? Okay, now I know we know a lot more about, fast forward 40 odd years, we know a lot more about fiber now, but not so much then. But the second thought that popped into my head on that very day was, oh, they've missed something. Is there something else in food that's important to us? So fast forward to about 2011, 2012, when I first listened to a guy called Professor Vladimir Kavenson, who's the head honcho at the St. Petersburg Institute for Biogerontology and the key man behind all this research with his team. It was like a light bulb going off. It was one of those rare moments in life where you have an epiphany. You know, I
Mhm.
always like that word, but we don't have them often enough. I wish I had epiphanies more often, but there we go. And because when I heard him lecture, he basically said that all their research had shown that these very short chains of amino acids, remember two, three, or four, that are in food act as gene switches. And it was like bang for me. So here is something else that is in our food that we are now aware of that acts as gene switches, a direct message.
Mhm.
Hence the old adage, you are what you eat,
Mhm.
right? But
Yep.
now we know why. And it explains, lots of people are into epigenetics, right?
Mhm.
Changing their DNA, their formats with food. Well, now we can be even more precise and say yes, and we can tell you which peptides are doing it. So the Soviets, there may be more, but the ones they put in the public domain, they put 21 in the public domain, and they have all sorts of impacts. So they can impact our thyroid gland, our testes, our ovaries, our eyesight, all sorts of things that they can impact. In Russia today, and in other Russian-speaking countries, because Russia is not the only country that speaks Russian, they are sold as food supplements. And some of the things that, and of course, they have clinics in those regions, in Kazakhstan and other places, that actually use the injectable versions as well. And they are doing some amazing work. They really, really, really are. So this to me is the next wave. I mean, in my 30+ year career, I've seen detoxification, that's the removal of heavy metals, be very prominent. Later, I saw nootropics, the so-called smart drugs, be very prominent. For many years now, bioidentical hormones, that means natural to and in the body, be very, very powerful tools. We now have a whole new set of tools, which are peptides, that are going to be more precise, and believe it or not, these particular ones very safe, because in over 40 years of use, and remember, they gave these to their troops, they gave these to their cosmonauts, they gave these to their Olympic teams. It's now on public sale right across their countries. Millions and millions of people have used them. No serious side effects. None. Not one.
Yeah. Is
And
this
they
to do with the
understand
fact
what
that they're bioregulators? So obviously they're regulating the levels. Yeah, is that correct?
I don't. Yes, that's correct. And I can't even give an adequate answer. And I've met Professor Cabinson on numerous occasions. I'm not even sure they know exactly why. But these peptides, well, if you say you swallow one, it will pass through the stomach wall, be circulating the system. It will induce protein synthesis. They're nano-sized. This is nature. They're nano-sized, and they go directly to DNA and act as a gene switch. Now, a gene is either activated or it is silenced. There's no middle ground. Okay.
Right.
So let's assume for a moment you have a weak thyroid gland. Okay. I'm pointing to my neck because that's where it is. And lots of people do. Lots of people do. And that's another story maybe for another day.
Yeah.
So it's called hypothyroidism. Your body is not making enough. Rarer is hyperthyroidism, where you're making too much. And those people are almost the opposite. So people who are hypo, they have cold hands and feet. They're rather lethargic. They generally feel tired, depressed. They have a light pallor about them. And the opposite with hyperthyroid, they're over energized. Their eyes are big. They're always on the go. It's very quite different. So if you were to consume, I'm not saying it happens overnight, but if you were to consume the thyroid peptide bioregulator, and there are all sorts of fancy names for these, which we won't get into because it's like learning another language. What would happen is if you were hypothyroid, it would turn the gene on for thyroid, and your thyroid would naturally start to make more thyroid hormones.
Yeah.
Conversely, it could silence it if you were hyperthyroid. So it's incredible to think it actually normal. That's why it bioregulates. Now, if you were taking a thyroid medication, you would want to monitor yourself, because you can't just willy-nilly keep taking it, because what can happen is you end up in a situation called downregulation. And it means that that gland would say, my goodness, there's so much thyroid in us, we're just going to stop making it. Okay. So that's an issue with a lot of medicines and hormones. Doesn't happen with these bioregulators.
Wow, that's
Doesn't happen.
really interesting.
It's totally, but this is a message direct from nature. So this is what makes them absolutely unique. I don't know if anyone else knows of anything like this. Please write to me, because
Sure.
I've been asking for since I met Professor Cabinson, 12 years ago, nearly 12 years ago, and I haven't found anybody yet that can explain this to me.
Yeah.
So they are something really special, in my opinion.
And you said
if anyone wants a book on this, we have written a book. A chap called Marius Corrazis, Dr. Marius Corrazis, has written a book, and it's called the Peptide Bioregulator Revolution. So you can find that on Amazon. That is a public-made book, the Peptide Bioregulator Revolution.
we'll
Only
look
about 10 quid.
So there's about 21, did you say? 21 different types of peptides. I know there's one for the pineal gland, isn't there? There's
Yes,
one for the blood circulation.
yes.
Incidentally, I wondered because for many years I've suffered with Raynaud's syndrome.
Mhm.
I say suffered, but I get it quite mildly. If it's very cold outside, the tips of my fingers will turn blue.
Right.
But I mean, recently I've improved that condition by upping my iodine intake.
Yes,
So
yes.
the iodine controls the forgotten the word.
It's good for the thyroid.
Thyroid, thank you.
Yeah. No,
Controls
iodine's a good supplement for thyroid.
and
Yeah,
the thyroid controls body temperature, doesn't it? So
absolutely. Most
presumably,
people have cold hands and feet and
yeah.
have got no reason. They haven't just walked in from the cold outside or been sitting under an air conditioner.
Mm,
It's almost certainly a very easy way. Obviously, all doctors would say, "Oh, we must do a blood test," blah 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 blah. But what did doctors do before there were blood tests? And it doesn't make them useless, right? It's still very useful. It's very simple. If you get up in the morning, have a thermometer at the ready. I mean, it's really easy now. You slap it on your forehead, you stick it in your ear, right?
mhm,
And take the temperature and write it down. Keep a notepad by the side and do that every morning for about 2 weeks. And then look back and see what number comes up the most. You will be shocked how unbelievably accurate it will be. Literally it could be 36.3, 36.4, 36.2, 36.3, 36. It will be incredibly accurate.
mm,
Basically, look at what number comes up most. Okay, there will be some variances, obviously, but not much. If you are, and I'm going to talk Celsius, 36.3 Celsius to 36.7 Celsius, congratulations, your thyroid is functioning fine. But if you're under 36.3, you are hypothyroid. And if you're over 36.7, you are hyperthyroid.
mm,
Okay.
mhm,
But I suggest to you that whether you take a thyroid medication, a peptide bioregulator, or iodine, you could be unbelievably surprised how I took 3 drops of iodine and it's gone up by zero point 0.1 Celsius. That's
mm,
interesting. You
mm,
will get it so unbelievably accurate, you'll be
mm.
gobsmacked. And then the game is to stay in that band.
Yeah, sure. So at the moment, I'm actually taking 6 drops of iodine in water every day, which is quite a high dose, I think, but
Mhm.
it's worked. I mean, my Raynaud's has gone, and it went after only a few days of doing that. I'm going to do that for a few weeks and then take a break from it just to see what happens. But sorry,
Do
go
you
on,
know
Phil.
what the Indians do in the poor parts of India? um, when women have breast cancer and they can't afford any medications, they rub iodine onto the breast where the tumor is,
Yes, I've heard that.
and they have
Yeah,
good results.
yeah.
One day I'll tell you the story of how we got rid of my wife's breast cancer 4 years ago.
Right.
And the
Okay.
first thing we put her on was iodine, and she told me on the first night, I can feel it mildly burning exactly where the tumor is inside me.
Oh my God, that's
But
impressive.
if you put it on a healthy breast, didn't feel
Yeah.
anything.
Well, we might have to talk about that on BitChute or somewhere else, to be honest.
Yeah,
But
I know.
shame. But
Well, as
that.
Clive says, you spell cancer with a K, it makes
Yeah,
it completely different.
absolutely. Okay, okay, Phil. Shall we leave it there for today? It's been absolutely unbelievable. I've really enjoyed this. I've learned so much from you. It's fantastic. I
Well,
know my viewers
thank
are going
you.
to love it, and my customers as well.
Well,
So,
I hope somebody gets something out. As a Ken Dodd used to say, he said people said it was very educational. Well, actually, their words were, "It taught me a lesson." But
brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, I'd love to have you on again as well at some point in the future because there's
yeah,
still a few things we haven't discussed,
sure.
topics,
We
and
did. We didn't talk about melatonin and the big C, but maybe another time.
yeah, we addressed it slightly, didn't we? But not very much. So that would be great, Phil.
If when you
So
stop recording, I could tell you then if you like.
yes, lovely. Thanks. Brilliant. Okay. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please like, share, and subscribe. We'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Good health.